This is Dr. Michael Cameron, and this is the Registered Behavior Technician Module 4. And the particular task list item is F04 from Professional Conduct and Scope of Practice. The specific title of this module is Maintaining Professional Boundaries. The duration is 60 minutes, similar to other modules, and there will be an assessment component similar to other modules as well, and that will consist of 5 questions. I should make a special note here that this module fulfills 1 of 3 hours of your ethics requirement, and this will be the beginning of an overview of your ethical obligations as a registered behavior technician. The specific goals of this module are first to introduce you to your professional community and to the certification board. You should know that the code of conduct and the ethical obligations of both board certified behavior analysts and registered behavior technicians have been developed by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, and you should have as much familiarity with that board as possible. The second goal is to introduce you to your professional associations that you will receive ongoing support from during the course of your entire career. The third goal is to specifically review the ethical compliance code for registered behavior technicians. I should note here that when you personally review that ethical compliance code, you'll note that there are line items and there are parts of information that are specifically for board certified behavior analysts, and there's other items that are specifically for the registered behavior technician. Of course, since we'll be going through the process of credentialing you as a registered behavior technician, we'll be focusing on those line items. As you advance through your career, of course, the other line items, those for board certified behavior analysts, will be relevant and important for you. The fourth goal is to provide examples and non-examples of healthy interactions with your clients, and finally to provide information in a context that will facilitate the recall of that information. As I've done in the past with other modules, I've reviewed the information that you have learned to date, and at this point you have a pretty robust knowledge base that has been developed. I put this word find here just to make it interesting in terms of some of the information that you've already learned. But of course, you've learned about the originator and founder of our science, the person responsible for the experimentation that is the basis for the science of behavior analysis, and of course that's B.F. Skinner. You've learned about a form of assessment that we use in order to evaluate language skills, communication skills, play skills, social skills, and of course that is called the VB map. You've learned about the assessment that we use to identify the potential functions of problem behavior, so we can develop a hypothesis in terms of what may be motivating an individual to engage in problem behavior, and of course that is a functional behavior assessment. You've learned about the principle of normalization. You've learned about the importance of what we refer to as people-first language, and the importance of what we refer to as a strength-based approach. That is always identifying the strengths, skills, and abilities of an individual and really building upon that to really provide good treatment and good services. You've learned about the acronym for your own credential, and that is the RBT, Registered Behavior Technician, and about the acronym for the individual that will supervise you in the context of your work as an RBT. And that person is called the Board Certified Behavior Analyst, or a BCBA. You've learned about the stakeholders of services. That includes families, parents, teachers, school administrators, government officials as well, and academics. All those folks are stakeholders. You've learned about the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. You've learned about Wolf-Wolfensberger, who is responsible for the principle of normalization. We've talked about Osgood semantic differential, and how language matters and the impact that language has on other people. And you've learned about critical outcomes, and those being referred to as a behavioral cusp. So here are the answers on the word find with the names of those concepts circled, or the names of those individuals that we talked about circled here as well. With respect to the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, the visionary founder was Dr. Jerry Shook, and he was responsible for developing the certification board and provided oversight for a number of years of the certification board. Unfortunately, Dr. Jerry Shook passed away in 2011. Currently, it's Dr. James Carr that is the Chief Executive Officer. And specifically, with respect to the board, it was established in 1998, and it was established to meet the professional credentialing needs that have been identified by behavior analysts, governments, and consumers of behavior analytic services. And the consumers, of course, being school systems and families and other stakeholders as well. Now, with respect to important associations, we have the Association for Behavior Analysis International. They have an annual conference that occurs in May of each year. And if this is a conference that you can potentially get to at some point in your own career, preferably every year, that would be your opportunity for advancing your own knowledge and information that you have about our field. Now, ABAI was established in 1974, and it contributes to the well-being of society by developing and enhancing and supporting the growth and the vitality of the science that we are so interested in. And of course, that is behavior analysis. Another very important association that you need to be aware of is what is referred to as the Association of Professional Behavior Analysts, APBA. And this is a nonprofit organization, and its mission is to promote and enhance the science and practice of applied behavior analysis. The current executive director of that association is Dr. Gina Green. One of the things I should note, and I found this to be true as a professional, is that although these people appear, Dr. Gina Green, Dr. James Carr, although they appear as executive directors and are certainly very well established in the field of behavior analysis and have very prestigious credentials and resumes themselves, these people are just extremely approachable. Throughout my career as an academic, I've often encouraged my graduate students to make personal contact with such individuals, or to introduce themselves during the context of a conference. And I've never heard anything but positive feedback from the graduate students that have done that. These folks are by and large very welcoming. They're very excited about mentoring people and guiding people, and I really encourage you that if you have the opportunity to introduce yourself and to speak to these individuals. They're all quite approachable. Now, with respect to your professional code of conduct, we will be going through each of the items on an individual basis, so that you have really good familiarity with what your responsibilities are. The first responsibility for you as a registered behavior technician is to rely on professionally derived knowledge that's based on science and behavior analysis when making scientific and professional judgments. I'm going to give you a quick story here because it's an extremely impressive story, and it occurred just recently. I received a phone call from a nurse that works in a public school in Idaho. And she was very interested in teaching personal hygiene skills to a little girl that was in one of the elementary schools in Idaho. And she contacted me because I'd written an article a number of years ago on teaching hygiene skills. And she wanted to know what the evidence-based practices were. And I thought that was such an impressive question for a school nurse to care enough to think about the little girl that she was providing services to, and to care enough in order to identify what the evidence-based practices were for teaching such skills was just a remarkable thing. As a result of that phone call, I worked with one of my other colleagues, and on a voluntary basis, we developed a program for teaching this little girl personal hygiene skills after using the bathroom. Now, one of the things that I want to point out is that you have received already in a previous module the good definition of what an evidence-based practice is. I do want to point out that you will hear other terms, specifically scientifically based practice or research-based practices. And I want you to know that those are different from an evidence-based practice. So something can be scientifically based or research-based, but not necessarily qualify as an evidence-based practice. The reason I'm making this distinction right here is because your obligation as a registered behavior technician is to be using the latter, and that is the evidence-based practices that are available to us. Now, the other piece that is relevant here is that from a legal standpoint, if you're working in a school system, by way of example, then the school system, as a result of specific laws, more specifically No Child Left Behind, 2001, and then the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, there are laws at this point that require teachers to be using evidence-based practices. So the implication here is that if you are working in a school system as well, then you are obligated to be using evidence-based practices for the individuals that you're serving. Now, a wonderful resource in terms of a delineation of the evidence-based practices is the National Professional Development Center on Autism Spectrum Disorder, and highly encourage you to look at the list of evidence-based practices that exist, because those will be the interventions, those will be the practices that you will restrict yourself to in working with individuals that you'll be serving. The second area I'd like to cover has to do with boundaries of competence. So your obligation as a registered behavior technician is to provide services or to teach or conduct research only within the boundary of your competence. And the point here is that you never branch out beyond what you're capable of doing and trying to provide some level of service that you really don't have the qualifications to deliver. I'll give you a personal story here. There was a point in my career that started fairly early. I was a doctoral student, and I became extremely interested in the field of behavioral medicine. I had a very specific interest in eating disorders. So, for example, compulsive overeating, binge eating disorder, and bulimia nervosa, and also anorexia nervosa as well. But despite the interest that I had, I did not have any particular experience in that area. So what I decided to do was to find an individual with expertise in behavioral medicine, and it happened to be Dr. David Mostofsky, who's out of Boston University in Massachusetts. So what I did as a doctoral student is that I received permission to take courses in other universities. And I went to Boston University and I studied under Dr. David Mostofsky, and I learned about behavioral medicine and specifically about eating disorders. And as a result of his mentoring, I was able to begin doing research in eating disorders, and ultimately published a paper just a few years ago entitled Stress-Induced Binge Eating, a Behavioral Analytic Approach to Assessment and Intervention. And that particular article is published in the Journal of Adult Development. But the point here is that when you have an interest or you have an opportunity to deliver services. However, it happens to be beyond your scope of competence and ability. What will be most important for you at that juncture is to identify a mentor with an expertise in that particular area, and then have that person provide mentoring to you so that you're delivering those services under the supervision of a skilled and capable individual with the expertise that is really required. So you're really following that guideline to ensure that you never find yourself in a situation where you are delivering a form of service to an individual that you really don't have the abilities, the ability or the skills to necessarily deliver. So you may have an opportunity, for example, to work with an individual with obsessive compulsive disorder, or perhaps an anxiety disorder, or Tourette syndrome, or some other form of disability. And despite the fact that your interest may be very strong in terms of working with such an individual, just ensure that you have the proper mentoring so that you're delivering evidence-based practices under the guidelines of a competent mentor that has documented experience in that particular area. The other thing that you will do is maintain your competence through your own professional development activity. And there are a lot of opportunities here, and there's quite a diversity with respect to professional development. One source of knowledge and one source of information can be through the literature. You can be reading journal articles from a variety of different peer-refereed journals. The flagship journal in our field, of course, is the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. And I highly encourage you to read articles of interest from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis just to advance your own education and your own knowledge base. It's within that journal that you'll read about highly interesting topics. You'll see what an actual single subject experiment looks like to provide verification that the interventions that were identified actually were responsible for the behavior change. And it's a great source of information and education for you. So that's one option for you. The second option, of course, is attending professional conferences. And depending on where you live, there will be regional conferences that you'll have an opportunity to attend. For example, I spent a lot of years in the state of Massachusetts, and the conference that comes up annually in October in Massachusetts is what's referred to as the Babbitt Conference. The acronym is for the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy, and it's referred to as the Berkshire Conference because it occurs in Western Massachusetts on an annual basis. The other option is online instruction, and one of my favorite resources for online instruction is Foxy Learning. It's through this website that you're able to download articles, read articles, and take a competency-based quiz on the articles. I find it to be a highly credible website with a very rich array of possibilities with respect to topics, and highly encourage you to look at that as a possibility as well. The next responsibility that you have as a registered behavior technician is to maintain your own integrity. And we do that in a variety of different ways, of course. But first and foremost, by honoring our commitments to other individuals. So, for example, you will have the responsibility for reporting to a school system on a day-to-day basis, or reporting to a family's home on a day-to-day basis, or going to a clinic on a day-to-day basis in order to deliver services. And that's a commitment that we have. And it's really important that we follow through with that commitment, that we are reliable with respect to the services that we're providing, and that other people can depend on us as well. Also, with respect to integrity, you're maintaining the standard of truthfulness and honesty. And that can cut across a variety of different areas. You're being truthful and honest with respect to the data that you're reporting, that you collected. You're being truthful and honest with respect to the behavioral presentations that you observe. The way that you report those to other people must be truthful and honest. You're also truthful and honest about your own credentials and your own scope of experience and your own background as well. Another piece related to integrity is that you're avoiding conflicts or conflicts of interest with the work that you're doing, and you're really maintaining your own professional boundaries with other individuals. So those are your responsibilities as well. Now, from a professional and scientific relationship standpoint, what's important is that as you're practicing, as you are using this knowledge that you're acquiring in the field of behavior analysis, that you're providing that service as a registered behavior technician in the context of a professional relationship. So that means that you are working for a school, or you're working for a clinic, or you're working for a family, or you may be working for a provider, and that is the mechanism by way of which you are delivering the services that you've been trained to deliver. Another responsibility that we have is to use what I refer to, and others refer to as well, as language of impact. There's a great article, it's written by Richard Fox, and it's called Translating the Covenant, and it's published in the journal of, it's called The Behavior Analyst, the journal. And the entire message in this particular article is that we have a responsibility to speak in plain English to other individuals to make sure that they are aware of the interventions that we're using, the assessments that we're using. And it's important for us not to alienate individuals with our language, but to welcome individuals with the language that we're using. And sometimes technical language cannot be so welcoming. So you're being very careful with your audience. You're maintaining a high level of sensitivity in terms of the way that you talk to other people, and you're being very careful with the words that you use and the language that you decide to present to another individual. Another responsibility is not to discriminate. Not to discriminate based on the age of the person that we may be serving, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their culture, their national origin, or their religion, or their sexual orientation, or their disability, or the language, or the socioeconomic class that they come from. Now, it may definitely be the case that there may be something about a person's presentation that creates some form of decision on your part that perhaps you cannot properly serve that individual. When that occurs, the most important thing is for you to recognize that that conflict exists for you, and to speak to your supervisor. In this case, your board-certified behavior analyst, as a supervisor, and ask that individual for assistance with that particular case, or in some cases to be removed from a particular case. What is important is that we do not continue working in a context or under a set of circumstances where we feel like we have a bias or we have a conflict and we cannot deliver the best services that we possibly can. And it may be because of a person's age or race or gender or ethnicity that conflict emerges. And when that is the case, it is your responsibility, your ethical responsibility, to identify it, to attempt to resolve it. And if it is not something that can be resolved, then it's your responsibility to exit from that particular case. And the point here is that every individual that is on the receiving end of services is getting the best from individuals, getting the best from the registered behavior technicians that come to their school, the best from registered behavior technicians that come to their home or into the clinic. And whenever there's an individual that is compromised for whatever reason, the most responsible thing that you can do is to speak to your supervisor about it and to excuse yourself from the case and not to continue working in a compromised situation. So recognize these problems. Recognize when some bias that you may have or some personal history or experience that you may have may interfere with your own effectiveness. And then finally, we never put ourselves in a situation where we find ourselves harassing or demeaning an individual in any way. And it's inexcusable to do that. And it's your ethical responsibility to avoid such behavior. Also, as a registered behavior technician, you are avoiding exploitative relationships. So you do not engage in sexual relationships with the clients, or if it's a board-certified behavior analyst, with the mentee that may be working under their supervision. That means your supervisor should not be engaged in a sexual relationship with you. You're refraining from sexual relationships for up to 2 years after a professional relationship has been formally ended. And finally, you do not barter for services unless there's a written agreement between yourself and the person receiving those services. So these are additional standards that you are following as a registered behavior technician. Also, it's your responsibility to identify when there's multiple parties involved. There may be a hierarchy established within the context of service delivery, or even within the context of a meeting. And it's important for you as a registered behavior technician to identify that hierarchy and to communicate with the primary ultimate beneficiary of services. So in that case, it may be a family member. So if you're at a meeting in a school system, an individualized education program meeting, IEP meeting, and you are sitting there with the board-certified behavior analyst and school administrators and family members who are the legal guardians, they are the ultimate beneficiaries, and that is the person, the family member at that table that you're primarily responsible for communicating with and doing so with honesty and with integrity. You are also ensuring that a person's rights and prerogatives are supported, and that means you're supporting your client's legal rights. So for example, as I mentioned to you before, a family has the legal right to receive evidence-based practices to guide their child in terms of that child's education and skill development and behavior change. You are also responsible for presenting your own credentials upon request. This is not something that is uncommon. If you are working for a family, for example, or you plan on working for a school system and teachers in a particular school, they may ask you to produce your resume just so that they can do a review of your depth of experience. One of the things that people do not want is somebody that is presenting themselves as an individual that may be skilled or have a certain level of experience, only to find out that the person's level of experience really is shallow. So for that reason, it is always a really good idea for you to maintain your resume, to be able to talk about your credentials and your experience, and also the kind of experience that you have upon request. You'll also be responsible for securing permission for electronic recordings of interviews and sessions. So if there is a situation where you feel impelled to record a meeting, for example, or some kind of conversational exchange between yourself and another person, it does require permission to do that. Here again is a place where your board certified behavior analyst will give you some very clear guidelines and the actual permission forms that need to be signed in order for you to do that. Next, it's critically important for you to maintain the confidentiality of the individuals that you're serving. I think one of the most common errors I've seen for a person that's functioning within the role of a registered behavior technician is the error of taking liberties of talking about a client that they're serving in the context of a public environment. So that person may be using the name of a family member, the name of a parent that has a child, for example, with autism spectrum disorder, or the actual name of the child, and doing so in the context of a restaurant or a coffee shop or some other location. That is a clear violation of a person's confidentiality, because it's very, I mean, you can see how it is very easy to understand that within that context, there may be patrons sitting in that restaurant, sitting in that coffee shop, that know the individual that you're talking about, have some contact with that individual, and you may be revealing information that is confidential to that family and to that client or to that child. So maintaining the confidentiality of others is critically important. Another area where I've seen violations in this particular standard is when confidential files, for example, are left in a car and are visible through the windows of a car. So you may see a child's name on the confidential files. You may see very important and personal information on those files, and those files may be visible throughout within the context of the car. So being very cautious about the way you speak with other people and the context in which you're speaking about other people is important. Ensuring that any confidential files that you have are concealed. They are not left in the open, certainly not left in a car, not left on a table, not displayed in a restaurant or on a countertop, for example. I've also had situations where an individual's car has been broken into with confidential files in it, and that has been very problematic, or a car has been stolen, for example, with confidential files in it as well. So for all these reasons, you're being very careful about the files and how they're displayed, where they're kept as well. And you're being very careful with your language and the way you talk about other people and the context in which you're talking about other people. The other piece is email. We make it a practice of using encrypted email to ensure that information is not shared on the internet electronically. Information that can be acquired by other people that would end up resulting in a violation of an individual's confidentiality. So once again, here too, you will want to speak to your board certified behavior analyst about what the standards are for them and for perhaps the organization that you're working for, or for the school system that you're working for, or the clinic that you're working for. What is a standard with respect to email correspondence, encrypted email? What is a standard with respect to the confidential files that you may be carrying with you? What is a standard with respect to an individual's confidentiality in general? Now, in the age of technology and social media, there is also a high risk for violating a person's confidentiality as a result of using social media. For example, YouTube or LinkedIn or Reddit or Flickr or Twitter. So it's critical that you are not using the names or images or video footage of individuals in the context of social media. I have personally seen some very unfortunate situations as a result of somebody taking liberties in terms of doing that. One such situation had to do with a registered behavior technician posting the images of a child that they were working with on Facebook. And there was no ill intentions in terms of doing that. The registered behavior technician took photos of a child on a playground, posted them on Facebook without the permission of a family member, and found out quickly that the mom of the child was separated from the child's father as a result of domestic abuse. So the mom had a restraining order against the father. The father saw the pictures on Facebook and was able to identify the location where the mom and the child lived as a result of those postings, and that resulted in a major violation of confidentiality and created great complication for this particular family. So I know this is an extreme story and it's an unfortunate story, but this is the kind of thing that will happen if you do not maintain the confidentiality of others, and when you take liberties to use social media, and despite the fact that you don't have ill intentions, you can create a very complicated situation, for example, for a family as a result of doing that. So you are always receiving very explicit permission whenever using the image of a child or the video footage of a child or the name of a child in any context, but especially as it relates to social media. You will also have standards with respect to maintaining records. There are standards that you need to follow in terms of the creation, the storage, the transfer of those records, and the disposal of those records as well. Once again, this is the place where you will consult with your board-certified behavior analyst, and you will ensure that you understand what the requirements are for storing records under lock and key, for example, how to dispose the records in terms of shredding, and then understanding the applicable guidelines around the policies and procedures for doing so. You'll also have requirements in terms of how long you can keep records, which I'll touch on in a moment. However, probably the most important thing that you can do here is to ask the question, what are my responsibilities in terms of the creation, storage, transfer, access, and disposal of the records that I'm responsible for keeping. The next standard is related to disclosure, and that has to do with never disclosing confidential information without the explicit consent of your client, except when it's mandated by law or permitted by law for a valid purpose. One of the issues here in terms of disclosure can relate once again to families with a child with autism spectrum disorder. One area that I see occurring quite frequently is when a family is going through the process of divorce, for example. Now, the national divorce rate is about 50% for people without a child with autism spectrum disorder. There's been a lot of debate in terms of how much higher it is for families with a child with autism spectrum disorder. Is certainly higher than the national average, and for reasons that you can well imagine. It is very difficult to manage the care and the education and the health of a child with a disability, and it puts stresses and strains on family members, and as a result of those stresses and strains, families can fracture as a result. So with respect to the disclosure of information, it's important to know, who the guardians are, who the legal guardians are, and that you're sharing information with all individuals that are the legal guardians of the child. And just because a mom and a dad, for example, may not be together, that does not mean that information should not be shared equally with both individuals. So the legal guardians could be a mom and a dad, could be a mom and a mom, or dad and a dad. We have a variety of different presentations in terms of family configurations. And if there happens to be a split in the family, or they're going through the process of separation or divorce, it's important for you to disclose and to give information to both guardians, and just not one over the other. So the implication here is that you're always maintaining an update in terms of who the guardians are, who the legal guardians are, who is eligible to receive information, and it's your responsibility to disclose information responsibly. The next responsibility for you is to document your professional work experience. One of the things I mentioned a little bit earlier in this module is that you will be responsible for disclosing your own credentials. So for that reason, you will want to maintain an updated resume and to ensure that your resume provides a good, rich outline of your years of experience, and also the kind of experiences that you have. Especially for registered behavior technicians and you entering into the field, or just entering into the field, even voluntary experiences are important to document. So some of you, for example, here may have done volunteer work. You may have done Best Buddies. You may have volunteered in Special Olympics. You may have done other forms of voluntary work in the context of high school or college or post-college. All those things are important to document and can flesh out a resume and to make a it'll make a difference in terms of your communication of that kind of information. One of the other things that registered behavior technicians often do is to participate in annual conferences, as I mentioned previously. So it could be a local conference, it could be a regional conference, or a national or international conference. And many individuals will do what's referred to as a poster session, whereby they will participate in some kind of research study with a mentor. And that mentor may be a board-certified behavior analyst. And that research study may be presented in the context of a poster session at a conference. It's that kind of activity as well that you would put on your resume, because that is something that an individual is going to want to see. So a potential employer, for example, would be interested in your presentation background and your research background. A family may be interested in your presentation background and your research background, and individuals that may be working in a school may have a similar interest as well. So the point here is that you will want to establish a resume if you don't already have one, and then maintain an updated resume that lists out your voluntary experience, your employment history, your research background, your presentation background, and it'll be best for you if you're revisiting that resume at least every few months and just spending a little time updating it, because somebody will ask for it, and it may not be because you are applying for a new job, but because a family member's requested it, or somebody in a school has requested it, or a clinic or a hospital-based setting that you're working. Now, with respect to the records and data that you'll be maintaining, Our obligation is to maintain records for 7 years or as otherwise required by applicable law. You'll also be responsible for creating, maintaining, disseminating, storing, retaining, and disposing of information responsibly. My best advice to you is to ensure that you know what the policies and procedures are of the person that you're working for, the supervisor, the board certified behavior analyst, or the organization that you're working for, or the school system, or the clinic, or the hospital. All of these locations and all of these individuals that I'm mentioning will have policies and procedures centered on this issue. And it's important for you to understand what your requirements are in terms of maintaining those records. Because this is a professional obligation and a responsibility that we have. In addition, with respect to our ethical responsibilities and obligations, we must be individuals that are constantly in the process of assessing behavior. We're always using some kind of assessment process or assessment tool prior to working with an individual. So for example, it may be a skills assessment that we use. It may be a functional behavior assessment that we're responsible for conducting prior to developing an intervention for an individual. The fundamental purpose of the assessment is to ensure that we are informed, to ensure that we have the necessary information to design the best possible program for a child or an adolescent or adult. So everything that we do is assessment driven, and that's another primary responsibility that you will have as a registered behavior technician. Now to close, we have some questions and answers, and the first is a true and false. The first question is, the following terms are interchangeable: scientifically based practice, research-based practice, and evidence-based practice. And as we've discussed in the context of this module, these are not interchangeable. That evidence-based practice means something very specific. We have reviewed the definition of what an evidence-based practice is, and that term is not interchangeable with scientifically based practices or research-based practices. The next question is that there are 3 options for maintaining your clinical knowledge, and the options that you have include reading journal articles, attending conferences, accessing online training programs such as Foxy Learning. The next question is to provide an example of a multiple relationship, and this would be one where you're offering childcare to a family, but you're also working for that family as a registered behavior technician. That would be a prime example of a multiple relationship with an individual, and a relationship that needs to be avoided. The third question is that there are 2 common actions that result in the violation of a client's confidentiality. First, in terms of an answer, is talking about a client in a public place and using that client's name or identifying information. Or, as we've discussed, leaving file folders with identifying information in a car, and those files being visible through a window, for example. And then finally, for what length of time are you required to maintain client records? And the answer here is for 7 years. And that's your responsibility. So this concludes Registered Behavior Technician Module number 4. This is qualifying as 1 hour of a total of 3 hours in terms of ethics instruction. And thank you for attending.